Well, thank you, Naomi, and wonderful to welcome all of you to our PCRC webinar. And special thanks to our presenters. It's been a pleasure to work with Dr. Kehl and Dr. Adams to put together this webinar. And we do want to hear from you and to hear your input and questions along the way. But to introduce our speakers, Dr. Karen Kehl is the Health Scientist Administrator in the Office of End-of-Life and Palliative Care Research in the National Institute of Nursing Research. She oversees a portfolio focused on end-of-life care and hospice and the NINR Research Centers Program Awards, i.e. like the PCRC. Dr. Kehl's research background focuses on improving preparation of families for care in the last phase of life in the home hospice setting. Prior to her current role, she was an assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Nursing and the clinical director of a regional hospice. She is a fellow in palliative care nursing and holds BS, MS, and PhD degrees in nursing. So welcome, Karen. Pleasure to have you on the webinar. And joining Karen is Dr. Lynn Adams. Lynn Adams is a program director at the National Institute for Nursing Research in the Office of End-of-Life and Palliative Care Research and NINR Centers Program, where she manages the palliative care portfolio and the NINR Centers Program Awards. Dr. Adams came to the NINR from the NIH Office of Research on Women's Health. Prior to her experience at the NIH, Dr. Adams was a research fellow at the City of Hope National Cancer Center, where she led preclinical research studies on treatments for breast and prostate cancers. As a postdoctoral fellow at the UCLA School of Medicine, she designed and implemented research investigating the chemopreventive activities of natural products. Dr. Adams earned her PhD at Purdue University, and her professional interests include nutrition science, cancer prevention and treatment, palliative care science, public health, and science policy. So welcome, Dr. Adams. Also a pleasure to have you. And we also have the distinct honor of joining us today, Dr. Jerry Miller. And Jerry, I will hand over to you to say a few words to kick off our webinar.
Many thanks, Jane, and hello to everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and anything in between. Thank you for taking time today to be with us on this webinar. We very much appreciate it. I just wanted to take a couple moments to introduce to you what we hope will be a new addition to the PCRC webinar series, and hopefully something that will be useful for all of you. We've been so pleased with the webinar series through the PCRC and the Investigator Development Corps. It's become a real rich resource for people to interact, to learn about, and hopefully develop their skills as being researchers in palliative care. And so Karen, Lynn, and I have had several conversations about what could we do from the NIH, NINR end and programmatic end to help in your own development of palliative care science. And so we thought, and we're grateful to the PCRC to allow us to offer several informal webinars that particularly are related to looking at understanding the NIH funding process, understanding review and special issues that you have in trying to either obtain or maintain the ever elusive NIH funding. And the topics that we want to talk with you about are not necessarily basic 101 NIH issues that you probably have picked up from maybe NIH webinars, maybe talking to your own program officer of the grant that you have, or maybe through your own research program staff at your various institutions. But instead, we want to kind of have an informal, almost chat-like discussion with you around topics that seem to be coming up in conversations with the PCRC membership, things that you've asked us about, questions you've posed, things that we see in applications related to the PCRC. We want to really be very informative but speak broadly about these kinds of topics with the goal that you'll pick up the phone and you'll call your program officer to talk more about understanding issues related to NIH grant applications. And so I'm very pleased that Karen Kehl and Lynn Adams from our office are here to discuss with you today. a topic that I tend to call finding your FOA, and trying to understand how you can find funding opportunities that meet your research interests. And then also the many changes that are happening at NIH in regards to funding announcements. We hope that some of this information will reiterate what you already know, but will be maybe new to you and will help you in becoming NIH funded. So thank you very much for everyone. We love to hear your questions. If there's a particular NIH kind of question that you have, we're happy to entertain future webinars to address them. But for now, thank you again. Enjoy the webinar, and Karen and Kehl, it's yours. Karen, Kehl, and Lynn Adams, it's yours. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much to Jean and the PCRC and Dr. Miller for that introduction. This is Lynn Adams for voice recognition. So today, we really want this to be as interactive as possible. So we will be introducing a topic and then taking breaks for questions at the end of each section. And today we will discuss the different types of funding opportunity announcements, how to find them, and then all about contacting a program officer. Next slide. Thank you. So you may have noticed lately that NIH is no longer releasing new program announcements, or PAs. So there are still PAs and other forms of program announcements like PARs, RFAs, but the NIH has added this new animal called a NOSI, or a Notice of Special Interest, which we will go over in detail so that you can hopefully answer the question of what best fits your application area. Next slide.
So this is Karen, just so you know who I am, voice-wise as well. So notices of special interest indicate an institute's interest in a topic or a set of objectives. And this is something that in the past has been done with program announcements, but those program announcements very often had standard receipt dates, standard review dates. And the primary reason to put them out was just to say, hey, we're interested in palliative care. The process for putting out a notice of special interest is not as lengthy, and it allows the institutes to respond more quickly to areas of particular interest. Now, as you can see, the NOCs all will include a list of program announcements or program announcements with special receipt, referral, or review dates, which I'll call PARs. The review and the receipt date for the NOCI will be based on that PA or PAR. And it's important to realize that most NOCIs have no set-aside funds. So let's talk a little bit about what this critter is and what it looks like. The example that I'm showing here is a NOCI that happens to be an administrative supplement, but NOCIs come out in all sorts of flavors. So there may be NOCIs that point to our O1s, our 21s, and to many other mechanisms. This is one that happens to be out right now and is appropriate for much of palliative care, so we thought that we would highlight it. A NOCI looks a lot like the funding opportunity announcements that you're used to. It will have a notice number. There will be key dates listed on it, the date it's released, and the expiration date. And you'll notice on the bottom of this page, there are related announcements. Those are those PA numbers, those funding opportunity announcements that the NOCI points to. And you will always have a NOCI pointing to a funding opportunity announcement. This is from that same NOCI, and you'll see that NOCIs can be signed on to by multiple institutes, or they may come out from just one particular institute or center. For this biomedical ethics supplement, it's signed on to by many institutes, and you'll see that most of them have a little bit more specific information. For example, if you look at the NCI one in the middle, they say they're specifically interested in bioethical issues relevant to cancer research and care, and then give you some detail about that. So when you look at a NOCI, just like when you look at a FOA, you want to take a look carefully at what each institute says they're interested in related to that. You'll also see on the NOCI that there's information about the scope of support. In this case, there is information about how much money is committed overall towards this supplement program. And there's also application and submission information. This is very typical of what you'll see with a NOCI, where the application and submission information will point back to a particular funding opportunity announcement. In this case, it points back to PA 18591, which are the administrative supplements for existing NIH grants and cooperative agreements. But you'll see it's followed by some additional information. It's very important that you read this additional information on the NOCI, because if you are responding to the NOCI information here does supersede what is on the funding opportunity announcement. So you have to very carefully read both the funding opportunity announcement and the NOCI. You'll also see that NOCIs have scientific or research contacts listed, and just like a funding opportunity announcement, if there are multiple institutes or centers, you're going to see multiple scientific or research contacts for each one of those institutes or centers. And we'll be talking a little bit later about how you decide which one you're going to talk to first. A few more things about NOCIs. So NOCIs, for your application to be considered responding to a NOCI, you have to include the NOCI number, that NOT number, in the form, on the SF 424 form, in box 4B. If you send in your application, it can be to the right FOA, it can be on the right topic. But if you do not have this number in, it won't be considered as responding to that particular NOCI. You can only select one NOCI, which is important. There's not a place to put in multiple NOCIs, even though what you're proposing may be responsive to multiple topics. And once you submit an application with a NOCI, that NOCI cannot be changed. This is a lot of information, and we know it. So we want to give you a chance to ask a few questions about NOCIs.
So Karen, this is Lynn. If I were going to apply to a NOCI, normally for a funding opportunity announcement, there will be a link to the application from that announcement. Do you link to it from the NOCI, or do you go to whatever parent announcement is related to the NOCI?
That's a fantastic question. It's best if you can link to it from the NOCI, because what the NOCI says supersedes what the FOA says. You do want to know what funding opportunity announcement you're responding to, and you still need to respond to the appropriate funding opportunity announcement. And what I mean by appropriate is it has to, the NOCI, as I said, will have a list of funding opportunity announcements that are related. So you have to respond to one of those related funding opportunity announcements. And you have to make sure you get the right one. So if it's clinical trial not allowed, you don't want to put a clinical trial in. This is one of the reasons why we recommend, especially in responding to an NOCI, that you talk to the program officer of the institute that you want to respond to, because there will be some differences from one institute to another in their areas of interest. And we all want to make sure that you get both the right funding opportunity announcement and the NOCI correctly noted.
Great, thanks. We have lots of great questions coming in. First, why did NIH stop program announcements?
That is a great question. So we still have parent announcements, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. but the program announcements, as I said, the NIH found that the majority of them did not have special receipt dates, did not have special review criteria. They really were serving the purpose of announcing the topics that an institute was particularly interested in. The NOCI process allows us to let you know what our institutes and other institutes are most interested in a way that is both more expedient. We can respond quicker when there are changes in the field, and that still allows us to participate with other institutes and centers and be able to track when there's strong response to a particular scientific area.
Thank you. We have one attendee who uses Pivot to find the right opportunities. Will that accurately capture NOCIs?
That's a wonderful question too. So most of these other systems have caught on to what's happening with NOCIs. But as I said, these are a bit complicated as we all learn the process. Once you get through the process a couple of times, it becomes second nature. I would say at this point, if you find something that you're interested in, as always, contact the scientific contact and talk to them to make sure you are hitting both the right funding opportunity announcement and the right NOCI from whatever source you find it from. And we will talk a little bit about some of the sources that you can go to find this up-to-date information.
Thank you.
Any other?
Yes, still a few questions. What if I want to apply to an institute that is not signed onto a NOCI?
So if you are interested in a NOCI and the institute you're interested in is not signed onto it, both the institute and the NOCI have to match to respond to that NOCI. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't put in an application on that topic, but it would not be counted towards the NOCI, or it would be assigned to if you put it in under the NOCI, it will be assigned to an institute that is signed on to that NOCI.
Okay, thank you. And do all applications like R21 and R34 need to be linked to a NOCI?
Applications actually do not have to be linked to a NOCI unless they are responding directly to that. So you can still come in on the program announcements that are out there. You can still come in on PARs. You can still come in on parent announcements and not list a NOCI. And all that means is that you are not responding to that particular NOCI and it doesn't get tracked for that area. So there are NOCIs that include funding opportunity announcements for R21s, R34s, and other mechanisms. It really depends on the particular NOCI and what you're planning on doing, which is again why we tell you to talk to one of us.
That's
Do we
great
have other
advice.
NOCI questions?
Not that I'm seeing currently. I think we can move forward. Thank you for answering all of those.
We're glad to, and thank you all for putting in your questions. We figured it's much easier to do it as we go so we can address them right away. Lynn, you want to talk about program announcements?
Yes, thank you. So as I mentioned in the introduction, program announcements are still available. They will be expiring and will be replaced by NOCIs and the parent announcements. And what are those? So a parent announcement is a general, all NIH-wide announcement for any idea that you have that you want to put an application in. And so there's a parent announcement for R01s, clinical trials, R01s, non-clinical trials, R21s. You get the idea. So they're investigator-initiated applications. These use the standard due dates and have standard review assignments that would go through the Center for Scientific Review. program announcements, PAs, are what we would most commonly see, are issued by one or more institutes that want to sign on to highlight areas of scientific interest, encourage applications for new and ongoing programs, and these again can use standard due dates. So parent announcements, as I said, will continue to be available as long as they are active and they're what you are already used to seeing. So next slide. So then we have PARs, and these are a little bit different. So PARs have either special receipt dates, and a good example of this would be if you were familiar with our Building Evidence funding opportunity announcement, that had 2 receipt dates per year rather than 3, which is the standard. There might be special referral criteria or review considerations. So for example, the palliative care for American Indian Alaska Native populations, PAR, has specific criteria such that the PI must show a collaboration or relationship with the community they propose to study. So that's an example of what would be a special review consideration. And PARs may also lead to additional instruction for the reviewers by the scientific review officer, or they may be assigned to a special emphasis panel. So the receipt dates may differ from standard due dates. They still generally do go through Center for Scientific Review, or some institutes may have their own specific review groups. And as with the PAs, there are no set-aside funds for PARs. So PARs, you can think of them as a PA with special something. Next slide. And so the RFA is often looked at as the golden ticket, mainly because an institute is saying we have set aside funds for these applications, and a certain number of applications that score well will get funded. And it usually identifies a really more narrowly defined area for which the institute is interested in, generally has a single receipt date specified in the RFA announcement, so you should check that, and generally is reviewed by a scientific review group that's convened by the institute that puts the RFA out. So, you know, while there are a guaranteed number of awards, these are limited. And so if you look at the RFA, it'll say how much money the institute has set aside, and then how many applications that score well they intend to fund. But these numbers are limited, and the competition is generally pretty steep for other funding opportunity announcements. Other things about RFAs, in most cases, there are no resubmissions. Generally, this is a one-shot deal, so you get one shot at this if you put your application in. So if interested in an RFA, you'll want to look at it carefully, look at the receipt dates, look at the budgets, amounts, how much the institute is committed, and how many applications they plan to fund. And again, generally these are reviewed within the institute, but can sometimes go through the Center for Scientific Review. Next slide. And this is Karen.
Yes, so there are a number of places that you can look to find these funding opportunity announcements. You certainly can go to the NIH grants and funding site, and as you'll see here, you can search active FOAs and notices. You can put in the search term NOSI, or Notice of Special Interest, and pull just those up. But this will always have the most accurate and most recent information. There are other sources that you can go to. A lot of people use grants.gov, and it's a good place to start and find out what there is, but make sure that you link to the actual funding opportunity announcement. We have had a few conversations with people who couldn't find information because grants.gov doesn't always have all of the information you might need. Another place that you can look for funding opportunities is on the PCRC website. And the great thing about this is they've already taken a look to see what things are going to be particularly of interest to those of you who are working in palliative and end-of-life care. And as you can see on their extramural funding and training opportunity page, there's a link that will take you to NIH, NINR, and AHRQ funding opportunity announcements, as well as some other funding and training opportunities. So another great resource there from the PCRC. You can also take a look at institute websites, and here are a few examples. Actually all of the institutes will have some tab on research and funding or grants and funding that you can follow to find out what funding opportunity announcements might be coming from that particular institute or that institute is signed on to. Some of the things to take a look for when you're looking at FOAs are what institutes are participating, what activity codes are allowed. That's where you get into, is this an R01, R21, or something else? Whether or not clinical trials are allowed or not allowed. Absolutely check key dates. We often hear from people who want to respond to something not realizing that it is expiring or has expired. Of course, you want to take a look at the research objectives that the institute is interested in, the eligibility criteria, and ask about whether there are any specific review criteria for this particular funding opportunity announcement. For a PAR, that would be one thing that you would definitely want to look for, as well as who you should contact for questions. We'd love to take any of your questions on FOAs if you have other NOCI questions.
We have a great question. Oh,
Okay,
go ahead.
please.
Sure. What happens if you submitted a grant application in response to a program announcement? It was not funded and the program announcement expires. Should you revise and resubmit to a standard parent announcement for an investigator-initiated R21, R01 parent announcement?
So I'll take this one. This is Lynn. I mean, the first thing I would suggest you do is call your program officer once the summary statements are out. You know, we can discuss the application with you, and we can give you advice on resubmission. You can resubmit to a parent announcement, but you should also talk to the program officer and see if there is another funding opportunity announcement that might also fit with your idea. So you'll find this as a theme in the next part of our talk here is call your program officer.
Great,
Lynn
thank you.
I was going to say, Lynn is absolutely correct. As a rule of thumb, you can often, but not always, which is why you need to contact the program officer, you can often go from a PAR to a PA, but you can't go from a parent announcement to a PAR or RFA as a resubmission, except in very rare situations.
Thank you for adding that. We have another question. Does it help to have feasibility data when applying for an R21?
That's one that's hard to answer in this type of forum because it really does depend on the stage of the science, the questions you're asking in the R21, and what you're planning on doing in that R21. It might be helpful, it might not be necessary, again, depending on what the particular focus is.
Yeah, and I would add that preliminary data is not required for an R21, and you should keep in mind that anything you submit will be reviewed. So if you have preliminary data that is relevant and that strengthens your case for why you need that R21, then absolutely, you know, you can add that in. But again, this is another one of those areas where for more specifics, the program officer could help guide you on that.
Great, thank you. And are NIH postdoc grants limited to US citizens?
Again, it depends on the particular award. So the best thing to do with that question would be to take a look at the particular award you're looking at and call the scientific contact on it. Or if you're not sure who to contact, Lynn or I can help point you to the right person.
Thank you. And finally, in your expertise, are there any listservs to be signed up for to receive NIH announcements that you would recommend?
To me, the most obvious one is you actually can sign up for a weekly update from NIH on notices and funding announcements that have been released within the past week. It is a weekly email, but you will always have the most recent information out. Lynn, can you think of any others?
No, that's the main one I was thinking of. If you wanted to be alerted, you know, I would also say check the Institute websites. So for example, NINR will always post updates for new funding opportunity announcements and that type of thing on the website. But as far as listservs, I would go with what Karen said, the NIH.
Great. I think that's all that we have so far. I'll turn it back to you.
Then we will move on to our next question, or our next set.
Great. So where can you get the information you need for applying for a grant? And there are several, places. As I just mentioned, individual institute websites. Karen had mentioned that NIH, all institutes all have their own website. So they have a wealth of information. You can check specific funding opportunity announcements either by searching on the NIH website or an institute-specific website. And as we've already noted, ask the PCRC because they always post the most relevant active announcements on their website. And also you can contact the PCRC because they give excellent advice to PCRC members. And then as my cell phone here popped up, your friendly neighborhood program officer, you can and should call an NIH program officer. Depending on the institute, we are also called program directors, program administrators. We go by a number of different names, but we're all staff scientists that administer grant portfolios in an institute's extramural program division. So we're all very friendly, as it says on the slide here. So feel free to give us a call. And next slide. This is something interesting if you're not sure who to call, but you have a topic like here, palliative care. NIH Report actually allows you to search for program officers based on a topic area. So if you did not know this, you can go to NIH Report and play around with that. And next slide. Or as I said, go to individual institute websites. This is NINR as an example. Institutes list their science areas and the contacts for those science areas. And in the right-hand corner here, you can see our end of life and palliative care. And if you click on that, next slide, you see our beautiful faces and our portfolio areas and all of our contact information. Next slide. You can also check specific FOAs or NOCs to find the right contact person. So in this example, there might be multiple program officers on a FOA or a NOC. And then you can select the institute whose aims or objectives are the most matching for your idea. But if you're not sure, you can send emails, aims to multiple program officers and ask to set up a meeting if it's appropriate, if you're not sure which institute matches your goals the best. Next slide. But we want to make this point that you should probably email first. We spend most of our days either on the phone or in meetings. So the best way to reach one of us is really to email and send either your aims, or if you don't have aims, a brief concept page. Even just an email, I have an idea, I'd love to discuss it with you if you have it fully formed yet. But it is best to let us know if you can. importance of the topic, how the research will advance the field, improve clinical practice, research question, outcome measures, rationale for approach, and what is the role of each team member in the project. These are things to think about when you're going to contact a program officer. You may not know all of these, so don't worry. As I said, if you just have an idea and want to discuss it, we are more than happy to do that as well. But you do want to make contact early in the idea process rather than just before you're ready to submit, just so you have time to take advantage of our advice as you develop your application. In our office, we generally talk to applicants 2 to 3 times before they submit. So again, it's good to contact us early. And next slide.
So there are a number of things that once you've already sent the email and set up a telephone meeting, there are some things that are helpful to think about before you get on the phone with us. One is to take a look at those funding opportunity announcements and have an idea of which ones you think you might be interested in. Don't worry, we are very familiar with them. We will make suggestions if we see something that might be appropriate. Along with that, as Lynn said, you know, if you see a funding opportunity announcement and there are multiple different institutes, you're very welcome to contact them. But we also find it helpful, especially in that first call, to know, have you decided what institute you want to work with? Are you still trying to figure out where you fit best? Because it may change what information you need to have. Thinking about what mechanism, whether you're talking about an R01 or an R21, can be helpful. It also is important to think about how your idea might fit with the mission of the institute that you're talking to. And that's something that program officers from all institutes are happy to talk about. You might want to think about if you have particular budget questions, or if there are NIH policies that you're not sure how it might fit, or any other questions that you have about the grants process. We also get people who call who will start out by saying, I have no idea what to ask, but I was told that I should call a program officer. That's fine. Just let us know what you're thinking so that we have an idea as we're setting up for that call, what information you might need and what resources we might want to have on hand for you. Something else to think about as you're preparing for your call with the program director. Think about whether or not your project is an NIH-defined clinical trial. And again, if you're not sure, that's a good thing to talk with the program officer about. Who you're planning on having on your team, what your proposed title is, because we often will ask you about titles, and whether or not you qualify as an early stage investigator or a new investigator.
Right, so this is actually a question that we answer quite a bit about this early stage or ESI status. What is this? Why is it important? An ESI at NIH is someone who's completed their terminal research degree or the end of postgraduate clinical training, whichever date is later, within the past 10 years. Someone who has not previously competed successfully as the PD or PI of a substantial NIH independent research award. And for definitions of this, the NIH website has a list of what would qualify. Generally, this would be an R01 equivalent, that type of thing. The ESI status is really only relevant for R01 applications, not anything like an R03 or an R21. And one thing I can't stress enough is that you should really check your ERA status to see that if you are an early stage investigator, that is in. Some people don't put the date of their terminal degree and then the system will not know. Sometimes the system is just plain wrong. So you'll want to check and make sure it's in there, because if it isn't in there, the SRO will not know to assign it. And in the next slide, actually, I'll go over why that's important. So, yeah. So, so for ESIs, they tend to have, some institutes may have different pay lines. Generally, they might fund an application if it scores a bit higher than they would if it were an experienced investigator. Peer review considers your potential overachievement, so they may expect less preliminary data, fewer publications. You may not have worked with your team as long. These are all things that the review panel would consider. So in review, they tend to clump the ESI applications together, although, you know, they've just made changes to review. So I have to say I'm not 100% sure that they're still doing that. But they do consider that you're an ESI, and then they consider that you might have fewer preliminary data and publications, et cetera. So if you're going to put in a multi-PI application, you lose that ESI status unless all of those multiple PIs are also ESIs. So that's something to consider. And then, of course, once you're funded in one of these larger NIH, say R01, for example, then you are no longer an ESI. I already mentioned that you should really make sure your ERA Commons profile is up to date. And if you become a PI, so let's say you get put on a grant after review because a PI has left, this does not affect your ESI status. You still retain that because your name was not on the application when it competed successfully. So another thing you want to look at and pay attention to is this note regarding transitional grants, R21, R33, phase 2 small business grants. You may lose your ESI status when that grant is awarded as well. So it's a lot to think about, but you know, if you have any questions about this, please ask us now, or you can give us a call later if something pops into your mind. So next slide. So how many times can you call a program officer? Once, twice, never? You know, I suppose this quiz would be more fun if you all could actually vote and chime in, but I think the answer to this question is D. Call us as much as you need to. Some PIs have us on speed dial. Some PIs call us once. Some PIs call us twice. You know, I accidentally gave out my personal cell phone number to a PI and got calls on weekends, which is what happens when you multitask and don't pay full attention to what you're sending in an email. So definitely just give us a call as much as you need to. We're very friendly, as I mentioned. Next slide. So in general, for a call, we generally plan for 15-30 minutes, unless you make other arrangements. We do like it if you have aims or a concept page, to send that in advance, generally 24 hours, but if you send it last minute, you know, we're usually able to briefly glance through it. And then if you need to reschedule, just email us as soon as possible. And we'll usually give you our phone number to call, so you can call our office, or if you have different PIs in different locations, we can set up a conference line, or you can set up a conference line. And then if you are using the PCRC, you can contact Karen, and she can help coordinate, and let the program officer or program director know, if it's other than NINR, that you're working with the PCRC in advance. Well, let me know as well, because that's always helpful. Next slide.
So as Lynn said, we really like to talk to people at least a couple of times before you submit. And even if you've talked to us early in the process, it's really helpful to talk to the program officer shortly before you submit. You can do a review of the final specific aims, but there are some other things you might want to discuss as well. One is study section or review group selection, because you do have the option of saying what your preferences are for a review group. You might want to also talk about some of the specific questions that might come up around your application. And it's always helpful to have that last-minute chat to make sure that nothing has changed from the NIH side before you put in your submission, and we're happy to do that. So we'd like to open the floor again for questions. As we said, we were going to stop periodically, and we'd love to hear about your questions about talking to program officers, finding program officers, or who you should contact.
So we have one question. Where in ERA Commons does it state whether you have ESI status?
Usually, if you look at your home page in ERA Commons, and we're not showing you that because what we see looks very different from what you see, but there should be a place where it says ESI eligibility. If that isn't there, then you want to contact the ERA help desk, because as Lynn said, we've certainly found situations where someone's graduation date wasn't listed or wasn't listed properly, so it was never calculated whether or not they qualify as an ESI.
Okay, thank you for that. And we've gotten a lot of great advice today, but one attendee wants to know your best piece of advice for those applying for F31 grants in palliative care.
Lynn, do you want to start and then I'll chime in?
Yeah, I was just going to start. So definitely call one of us, either Karen or myself, and we can guide you in that. We also have a training officer at NIH that can answer your questions as well, and we tend to work with him. His name is Dr. David Banks. So we work collaboratively with him. So it's best to talk, I would say, talk to us, and then we can set up a meeting with Dr. Banks and make sure that we have everything squared away. Did you have anything to add, Karen?
Well, what I would say is the other institutes and centers tend to work the same way that we do. We do recommend, especially when you're talking about something in end-of-life and palliative care, that you contact both the program officer in charge of that science area as well as the training program officer, because those training program officers at NINR, David Banks, are really experts in the mechanism and what you need to have for that F31 mechanism, but they may not be so expert in the science. So we want you to have the best help and advice that you need. Often, if you call our office, you may get Dr. Miller as well, because she loves talking with students. But we want to make sure that everything is being looked at, the science as well as the mechanics of the F31.
Yeah, and it's often, we usually recommend that you have your mentor on the phone call as well.
Thank you. So when we contact the program officer, shortly before the submission, what would be the best time to reach out to request another phone call? A month or so before?
I would say, I mean, sorry, go ahead.
To me, it really depends on what your needs are. I think it's not a good idea to contact me 2 days before you're planning on your submission, because if we see something we have a question about, it may put more pressure on you. But it depends on where you're at. If you've had a lot of review of your application, if you're quite confident in it, and you perhaps just have a question about review group, then waiting until a couple of weeks before submission might make sense.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say goes along with that. It really just depends on the question. If it's a quick, short question, you know, a couple weeks before, that's fine. But if it's about the whole premise of the study and are my aims okay, then you should probably do that much earlier.
Great. And after being awarded a grant, how often should you be in touch with the program officer? What kind of updates do you hope to get outside of progress reports?
Well, I would say for me, I love talking to my PIs. So I love it when they give me updates on, you know, how the study is going, publications, that kind of thing. And if there are any issues, if, you know, number one would be recruitment. If you're having anything you want to talk through with us, we want to see you succeed. That's part of why we do this job. So, you know, send us an email and we can talk about it. And I know I've helped many PIs work through those issues. Sometimes just talking to somebody outside the study helps. So we're happy to do that.
And I think how often you're in contact with your program officer It depends in part on how complicated your study is, how experienced you are. If I have an early stage investigator who has a fairly complex clinical trial, I probably am going to be wanting to talk to them more frequently than if I have a very experienced investigator who has a very straightforward descriptive study. Some of that is going to be spelled out in the terms of award, but as Lynn said, we love hearing from people when you're doing presentations, when you've got publications, but we also like those informal questions of, hey, I'm thinking about maybe doing this, what do you think?
Great, thank you. One attendee was once told that AHRQ is usually the best target for any proposal for which the primary outcome is healthcare utilization or cost, whereas NIH institutes are more appropriate if the outcome is clinical. Is this accurate, and can you clarify?
I would say we can't speak for AHRQ. And it really does depend on the particular study and what funding opportunity announcement you're responding to. For example, I know NIA has some funding opportunity announcements in palliative care that have specifically asked for that type of health services information. Again, this is one of those places where it's really important to talk to the program officer and ask them very specifically how they see this fitting in, or if they see this fitting in to the mission of their institute.
Great, thank you. Another question, what should you do if you fit in multiple institutes? Should I assume the PO will help with that?
Yeah, I always say, talk to multiple POs, and we will help guide you. Look at the institute's websites and look at what the strategic plan says. Generally, that will help guide you as far as which institute would be more appropriate. Do you have anything to add, Karen?
I would say, one of the things that we can help you with, as can our colleagues in other institutes, is if you have a basic idea but you haven't worked out fine points yet, we can sometimes talk to you about what NINR would be most interested in that idea, and our colleagues can tell you what NCI or what NIA would be most interested in that type of project, which gives you an idea of how it does fit into the institute and where our focus and interest is.
Thank you. And lastly, how do POs help or communicate with you on the other side of when your grant is reviewed by council? What timing can be expected between council review and notice of award?
Well, that is highly variable. So it depends on the institute, and it just, there really is no good answer to that question. It can be weeks, it can be months. An application is active for an entire year after council. So it can be picked up for funding at any time within that year. Generally, council is a closed session, so POs are really not supposed to be discussing what happens in council, and funding decisions occur way above our heads, so we really don't know. Generally, you will know about the same time that we do. So I always say, if it makes you feel better, send me an email. I won't be able to tell you much, but yeah. Anything else, Karen, that I missed?
Yeah, I would say that I think that whoever asked that question has been listening in on us, because one of the things that we would like to talk about in one of these future seminars is indeed your questions on what do you do with summary statements and what happens after you get we used to call them pink sheets, but what happens after you get your summary statement, and what are next steps? How do you make that decision about whether you revise and resubmit, or whether you need to take a different tack with something? And we would love to hear your questions on these things so that we can set up something that's addressing what you're most interested in. I see we're getting close to the end of our time, so I think that led very nicely into our conclusion, which is that we really are hoping to find out more about what some of your challenges and questions are for upcoming webinars. Some of the topics that we came up with are things like, how do you navigate review groups and making decisions about which review group to suggest? We certainly would be happy to talk with you about questions on clinical trials and data and safety monitoring plans, summary statements and revisions. But we would strongly encourage you, if you have ideas or questions, please feel free to email either one of us, or you can also contact PCRC and they will happily communicate it to us. We really want these webinars to be something that gives you information that you didn't have before. Lynn, do you have any?
No, I just wanted to thank everybody for tuning in and thank the PCRC for giving us this time to chat, and look forward to the next one.
And we want to thank Drs. Kehl and Adams for speaking today. If all of our attendees do go to the website, we have 2 more webinars that are posted for the near future. Next up, we have Dr. Ab Brody to talk about conducting palliative care trials with persons living with dementia and their caregivers. And Marie Bakaitis and Jennifer Temmel will discuss the challenges and opportunities with building a supportive care research program. We hope that you do join us for those as well. And we'll also be sending out an evaluation where we gather other topics that you might be interested in learning more about. So please take a moment to fill that out. I want to thank again to our speakers and for all of our attendees for attending today. Thanks, everybody.